Namaskar and good evening to the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. Today we are on our 77th episode of Reflections marking 101 years of Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. Today we have with us Professor Stephen Slawek, senior disciple of Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. On behalf of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation, I welcome Professor Stephen to our show Reflections.
Namaskar.
Namaskar, Professor Stephen. How are you?
Oh, doing okay. Getting older day by day.
Nice to see you and to have you on our show Reflections. And it will be very interesting to hear from you the beautiful memories of your learning process from Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. So to continue the conversation with you, we have your Guru Bhai and senior disciple of Pandit Ravi Shankar ji, Shri Gaurav Mazumdar.
Very good.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Good
Gaurav da.
morning. Nabarun, good evening.
Very good evening, Gaurav da.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How nice to see you both. And I'm looking forward to our 77th episode today with my wonderful Guru Bhai, Stephen Slawek. And I look forward to knowing more about you, listening to your wonderful music and collection of wonderful sitars you have from all parts of India, I guess, from Calcutta, from Delhi, from Banaras. And so let's go through your journey, Steve. Where do we begin today's session, our episode today with you? Take us to your childhood.
Okay, well, I grew up in outside a town called Westchester, Pennsylvania. It's about 20 miles west of Philadelphia. And so I had a very nice childhood because I was in a rural area and actually had a farm across the street, a dairy farm. So, it brought me very close to nature. We used to go ice skating on the reservoir that was about half a mile away and go camping out in the woods and things like that. So because of that interest in nature and closeness to nature, I eventually majored in biology when I went to the University of Pennsylvania. But also during my childhood, there was a lot of music in the house. My father played saxophone and my brother played drums and my sister played piano. And I had a little bit of instruction in piano, but eventually moved to the drums. And then my brother encouraged me to learn guitar. We had a guitar in the house. So when I was a teenager, I started studying guitar and eventually studied with a really well-known teacher who's no longer alive, Joe Scrow in Philadelphia. And I tell you, he was an amazing musician, just so accomplished, but he was pretty much only known in Philadelphia, even though he would accompany all of the artists who came through. So like he backed up Barbara Streisand and things like that. So yeah, I had a few years with him and he had a very systematic approach to teaching guitar, like permutating the fingers on the frets and like 1, 2, 3, 4 and 2, 1, 3, 4, 3, 1, 2, 4. So when I started with sitar, which was, the whole typical link through the Beatles, because I was a huge Beatles fan and played in a rock band for at least 3 or 4 years. And, the Beatles were the top for me in rock music. And when George Harrison picked up the sitar, that piqued my interest in it. And I started listening to Guruji's records. And I was actually lifeguarding during the summers at an apartment complex in Westchester where there were a few Indian families that I became friends with. His name was Dinkar Rao. I think they were from Trivandrum. And they went to India, I think, in 1969 and came back, in the summer of 69 and brought a sitar for me, 1969. And the same day that they brought the sitar, the University of Pennsylvania announced that it was bringing Dr. Lalmani Mishra and Pandit Gyan Prakash Ghosh to teach performance practice. So I immediately thought, okay, this means something. So I enrolled and studied at the University of Pennsylvania for 2 years, sitar. And the second year, Gyan Prakash Ghosh left after 1 year, and Ishwarlal Mishra came from Benares. And so I studied tabla with him for 1 year while I was also continuing the sitar with Lalmani Mishra. Prior to that, I had bought Guruji's book, My Music, My Life, and had worked on the exercises in that book. That, in the back of the book, there's about 30 pages of exercises. So even though I had never been to India and had never been taught sitar, when I started with the group of students, my technique, at least speed, the technique was not right, but my speed was at least as good as everybody else. And I learned very fast with Lalmani Mishra. So after 2 years, then I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and went to India and started the B Muse at the Benares Hindu University and stayed for 5 years continuing my studies with Dr. Mishra, and eventually got the master's degree and the M Muse. And I actually got the gold medal for being top in the class. And during the last year that I was there, you must know that Dr. N. Rajam, the very well-known violinist, she was teaching at BHU while I was there. And at that time, Guruji had his house in Shivpur on the outskirts of Benares near the airport. So he had asked if there were any good students that might like to come out and observe his teaching. And she recommended me, so I went out there with my wife and to Shivpur and met Guruji and observed him teaching Deepak Chatterji, Krishna Chakravarti, Kartik Shashadri was relatively new, I think, and Shubhendra Rao's father, Rama Rao. And I was, very amazed to meet Guruji. I think I was so amazed that I sort of didn't know what to talk about. So when we left and got back to our apartment, my wife said, what are you, crazy or something? You didn't talk about hoping to study with him at some point in the future. So right now, sit down and write a letter to him. So I did that. And I pointed out that I kind of considered him my first teacher because I used his book and, studied all of those sargams and alankars and paltas and so forth. So yeah, I wrote the letter, and it just so happened about a week later, you must know the Drupad Mela in Benares that Lalmani Mishra had started in 1975. This was the second year in 1976 of that Drupad Mela on Tulsi Manas, or Tulsi Ghat. So I was there for the beginning, and Guruji had been invited to inaugurate the proceedings. And as he was leaving, he saw me and thanked me for my letter and said, let's see what happens in the future. And, I had applied to go back to the University of Pennsylvania to do graduate studies in Asian studies and had received a full fellowship. But it just so happened that I met a professor from the University of Hawaii, Lewis Rowell, who eventually went to Indiana University. But he was at Hawaii and was studying in Benares with Premlata Sharma in musicology. And our apartment actually overlooked the musicology building. So I saw this person coming, and he actually came to one of my concerts at BHU. And we invited him for lunch, and he suggested that I consider ethnomusicology and asked me to go ahead and apply to the University of Hawaii. So I did, and I got an application in at the very last minute and was accepted there and given a grant by the East-West Center. So I had a 2-year grant to do a master's degree in ethnomusicology. And in March of 1977, Guruji came to Honolulu to perform his first concerto. First, actually, the second one had not been written yet, so his concerto. And he remembered me and actually called up and asked if he could come for lunch to our place because he knew my wife was Indian. So I guess he was craving Indian food. So he arrived to our tiny apartment in a stretch limousine, which could hardly fit in the parking lot of the apartment building. And he came at that time. Sue Jones was his assistant, so she was there as well. And we had lunch. Gayatri Rajapur Kasabam, who played Gotuvadium and just actually passed away a few months ago. She was teaching at the University of Hawaii. I actually studied Gotuvadium with her for 1 year. So she also came and helped with the preparations. And I played for him, and he said, well, it's too bad you're not in Los Angeles because I could teach you. And because he said he would be there that summer of 1977. And I said, well, the East-West Center grant that I have has a field work provision, so I can use that to come. So, we arranged everything. He asked me to telegram Dr. Mishra to get his permission. And that's how that all started. And I guess I went in May. Our daughter was only about 4 months old. And so I was leaving behind my wife and daughter to fend for themselves. And then I went and enjoyed. I had a Gandhabandhan ceremony with Guruji at the Vedanta Society of Southern California at the Hollywood Temple. And Ustad Alaraka Khan Sahab was there. And Harihar Rao, I think Indraneel Bhattacharya was also there, and Nodu Malik, and of course Sue Jones, and a few other people. So it was a nice ceremony. I had given Sue Jones my camera to take pictures, and it was one of those cartridge cameras, a very inexpensive Kodak camera. And I had not advanced the film all the way to the first shot. And she, was advancing it and thought that maybe the film had broken because it didn't stop advancing. So she just stopped. So I have no pictures of the actual ceremony, but I do have pictures of the reception afterwards. So that was the beginning. And, Dr. Mishra was a very good teacher. But he was a specialist on the Vichitra Veena. So left-hand technique was fine on sitar, but right-hand technique was not Guruji's technique. And I had to change all of that. So that was my first lesson, to lock the Da stroke against the Jodi wire.
That's a major lesson.
Yeah, it's a major lesson. My fingers, and actually, to put the gummock on every descending note, that was also new. So that had my fingers very sore for quite a while.
Yes. Yeah.
That was the beginning. I was there for 6 weeks. he had an apartment. Oh, I should have mentioned Shubho Shankar was also there at the time because he lived in nearby in Los Angeles. So I met Shubho, and his son was only about 3 years old at the time, and Kaveri had not yet been born. So yeah, we had a few times sitting with Shubho, not teaching because Shubho hadn't come back to it yet, but just to have a meal or something. So that was the beginning. He started with Yemen Kalyan and taught guts and lots of tons. Also, some basic exercises of sapat and from pa to ga, and then dara 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 dara, and then dividing it 5/7 dara dara da dara da dara dara, and 7/5 dara da dara 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 da, and so forth. 5/7 7/5 5/7 7/5 7/5 5/7 5/5 7/7 7/7 5/5, which right?
Absolutely, we all go through that, and it's very, very, very interesting. Very interesting when you get it. It's very nice.
Yeah, you have to keep the gummics on dha, re, and dha.
Yeah.
And when the mizrab goes a different way, you have to keep the gummic going the right way.
That's not easy.
No. So yeah, Yemen and Bihag and Natabairav and a little bit of Desh and Jaijavanti. And I think that was about it. He taught me 3 or 4 times a week for about 4 hours each time. It was very rigorous and amazing to be alone with him. Just such a treat. But also because I was doing a master's degree in ethnomusicology, and it was also technically a research trip, we would have time set aside where I would ask questions and I would interview him. So I think I was a little bit different from other disciples because I was always asking them questions.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. He was such a mine of knowledge that
Absolutely.
You ask him one small question and you get such a profound answer that it makes you think, it makes you go deeper. And he had answer for everything, and he explained it beautifully. That was one thing which really struck me, Steve, from
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I had one experience where when I studied with Dr. Lamani Mishra, he, of course, had his own ideas about the connection to ancient music theory and had done research on the Shrutis and created the Shruti Veena to demonstrate the different sizes of Shrutis and things. So he always talked about the Ekshrutik Rishab, and that the example of the Ekshrutik Rishab could be found in Rag Marwa. And if you take Rishab as in Marwa as a harmonic third above Dha, then it is a little bit low. So I wanted to confirm that with Guruji, and I mentioned about Marwa's Rishab being a little bit different according to Dr. Mishra. And Guruji said, yeah, Marwa's Rishab is actually a little bit high. So that was a very interesting experience to get 2 different opinions about the Rishab of Marwa.
Yeah.
And I actually used that anecdote in a paper I wrote to present at the annual meeting of the Society for Ethnomusicology, where I was talking about the Maihar Gharanas, some of its unique approaches to rags, like no pa, re, sangati in Gaud Sarang, no use of komoni in Kedar, and so forth. Or the use of no use of komoni in Bhairav, and Ramkali. So.
And also one more thing. I'm so happy you took this. You brought it up. How do you differentiate Bhairav you learned from Guruji and Bhairav how everybody else plays it? In sheer ascending and descending. I'm not even talking of Shrutis here. I'm just talking of the ascending, descending.
Yeah, ascending, descending is essentially the same. It's just that on Komal Dha, everybody uses means from Komal Ni, and Guruji did not do that. Guruji took it from Shuddh Ni.
Correct. Or he took it from Ma.
Well, right, yeah, from underneath you
Yeah.
come from Ma. And
That's
then,
clear. That's clear, Steve. But what about, don't you play Bhairav as Saga Mapa Gama Dhani Sa? Or you play Sare Gama Padhani Sa? What do you play?
no, Nisa Gama Da, right, and Nisa Gama Gama.
This is where my question is. Most of the people you hear, they will be doing Sare Gama Padhani Sa as Bhairav, which is the Bhairav part, and not Bhairav. And it's more of Kalingada than Bhairav.
Right, yeah.
Whereas Guruji, every time he has taught it. So this is one aspect. I'm happy you brought it up because it keeps coming to my mind, because we have always learned and we play Bhairav as Saga Mapa Gama Dhani Sa. Sani Dha Mapa Gama Re Sa, but Re Sa basically.
Right. You can do Re Gama Pa, but not Sa Re Gama Pa.
Yes, Gama Re Gama Pa Gama Re Sa. Mapa Gama Re Gama Pa Gama Re Gama Gama Gare Sa. So all those nuances of Bhairav. That's, or Dhani Sa also. Dhani Sa Re. Re Sa Ni Sa Sa Ni Dha Dha. That Dha always coming from Shuddha Ni. And Pa Mapa Gama Gare Sa. That long. That's very interesting. Now, I have just one question. We will come back to Los Angeles and this trip, 6-week trip of yours. Since you were quite musically aware, knowledgeable, and you were already learning while you were in Pennsylvania with your parents and your brother and your family, how was the Indian music culture pre-Beatles and post-Beatles? How did it change, and why do you think it changed so dramatically and so much in such a big way?
Right. Well, you have to remember that the immigration laws in the United States were very strict up until about 1965. And it was about 1965 in Norwegian Wood that George Harrison used the sitar. And so after 1965, the immigration rules for South Asia were relaxed. Before 1965, let's see, when I went to the University of Pennsylvania, the only Indians I had ever met were those people living in the apartment complex where I lifeguarded. And then there was one Indian, I think his last name was Pathak, who had come to Wyeth Laboratories, a pharmaceutical firm where my father worked. I may have met him. So what I'm saying is knowledge of India was nil up until mid-60s because we just, the only thing we knew about India was it had been part of the British Crown, and it was independent. And it was in high school, I was, we learned about China being communist and India being democratic, a democracy. So those were two developing countries, and we were basically looking at their future to see if democracy would work better than communism. And that was about it. And other than that, it was a poor country. We learned that Hindus would take a bath every day, stuff like that. That's about it. There was no Indian food to be had. Maybe in Philadelphia, eventually there was one place to have some Indian food, but it wasn't very authentic. So it was really from 1965, not so much the Beatles, but the immigration laws that changed. Now, in England, of course, it was a completely different scene because there were so many people from South Asia because of, the Commonwealth and the relationship to Britain being in the empire as a colony. So people were very much more attuned to Indian culture. And there was that Asian music circle that existed in London, and that's where George Harrison got some Indian musicians for his recordings. So, it was a combination of more Indians coming after 1965, and then that big explosion of interest, especially when Guruji played at Monterey Pop in June of 1967 and became a superstar from that point on. So that was when the real explosion happened. And, the big interest in Hinduism, Eastern religions, meditation, yoga, all of that started, all part of the countercultural movement as well. So it was a
Even though prior to 1965, it was almost 9 years of Guruji coming to the US and performing, and 10 years of Ali Akbar Khan being here.
right.
Still, there was, you had not heard any concert of theirs, or you had not heard anything about them performing anywhere, or
No, not until George Harrison came along and did that. And after that, of course, I became much more aware. And you have to remember, I was a senior in high school when I was first heard of Ravi Shankar. And I bought his LP, Ravi Shankar in New York. And that's where I listened to Marwa first time. Became my favorite rag. I actually performed Marwa at BHU at the end of my first year and was given the Vishnu Digambar Award for the best student performance. And so Marwa was a big rag for me.
it is a big rag. It is a big rag. So then things started changing, and with the immigration laws, more people were coming. So with them came more of cultural exchange and little more understanding and exposure, I think.
Yeah, I should say, prior to that, there were those things going on because the American Institute of Indian Studies existed. So it was mainly sending Americans to India to do their research. But the universities would have the Fulbright exchange program, and there were Indian studies programs at different universities, which is how I got into it at the University of Pennsylvania, because it wasn't the music department that brought Lalmani Mishra. It was the South Asia Regional Studies Department in association with the music department. But it was all done through a Fulbright grant that Harry Powers, the famous Indic musicologist, as he would say, was there at the University of Pennsylvania at the time. So I had classes with him as well. So, you had the university level interest in studies going on, but I'm talking about general cultural knowledge in general society. People who maybe didn't go to college or did go to college but majored in geography or sociology and never had any contact with any Indian studies. Indian studies programs were relatively small and still are relatively small, but now it's much larger, of course, because it's been so long, decades.
Wonderful, wonderful. So from there, from Los Angeles, then how things developed and
right. So after Los Angeles, I finished my degree in 1978 at the University of Hawaii and started a PhD at the University of Illinois at Urbana. So then can't remember if it was the first year. I think it may have been that Guruji came and performed at Madison, Wisconsin. And we had friends there that we had met in Benares, John and Joan Grace. So I went up, with my wife and daughter to Madison, Wisconsin. It was about a 4-hour drive from Illinois, and had classes there. In the summer, Guruji was in New York, so my parents were in Pennsylvania, so I would drive to Pennsylvania to visit my parents, and then take a train to New York City with my sitar and have a class with Guruji, and then go to my sister's house in New Brunswick, northern New Jersey, and then go back the next day and have another class, maybe 2 or 3 days of classes, and then go back to Illinois. Then the next time he came was to Chicago, so we went to Chicago and again had classes there. And then that was 1978 and 79, and then I got a grant in 1980 and went to India for 15 months. And he still had a house in Shivpur. So in October, I went out several times and had private, one-on-one classes with him. And then in December, he had his group of students come. So Deepak came and Krishna was there. Krishna and I would take a taxi. Guruji would send a taxi to BHU to pick me up because we were living on campus. And then we would stop and pick up Krishna. I think she was in New Colony. And then we would go for an hour to Shivpur, to Rimpa, Guruji's house. And then,
if you don't mind, can I interrupt? Because there's something very important what you said. Guruji would send the taxi.
Right.
So can you explain that?
Well, he knew that I had to get out there.
I know, but there was no taxi in the campus or around.
Well, he arranged for the car.
Yeah, this is one thing. Why I'm asking. Let me clarify myself. That he took care of all the students.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is something very important. Why? Because so he would teach. He would not charge anything.
Right.
And then he would feed the students, and he would also take care of their expenses. So this is something very unique, which all of us, I think, we got the blessing from Guruji, that he would take it so much responsibility towards his own children.
Yeah, I can say if you want to be absolutely accurate,
yes, I want.
Then that was the only time. Like, he arranged for the taxi. He also arranged for a place for Deepak and Shamadas Chakravarti. He was also there. And
yes,
there were about 10 people. Paolo Anzoloni from Italy had come, and he had a few classes. But so Guruji had arranged some rooms in Godolia and the car to bring those people. I think Parto was staying there at Rimpa. Maybe Deepak wasn't, because so anyway, after the 10 days of classes, and those classes would go on for close to 10 hours a day.
Yes.
Morning, afternoon, evening. And we would have lunch and tea and, breakfast tea. And I don't think we had dinner. We had an evening tea and then had an evening session from 6 to 8 or so. So it was like from 10 in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. Yes. And then back to BHU, getting there about 9 o'clock, having dinner, go to bed, get up, go out again. It was brutal. But as I was saying, that's the only time when that 10 days was finished, Kamala was with Guruji at the time, and she gave everybody a bill for the taxis and for the rooms that those guys had in Godolia. That was the only time that happened. The whole 30 years that I was having classes with Guruji.
Yeah.
That was,
All of us, I
that,
remember
yeah.
any moments, even in Banaras, whenever I visited, which was every year since I came to Delhi to live with Guruji in 1985, 86. We would go to Banaras, and I stayed in Hemangana only, in the Shivpur house of his, and
Ah,
so did Deepak. Then I from day one, from 1985, when I became Guruji's disciple, Deepak Da was there in Allahabad when I played for Guruji. I was playing violin then. I was not even playing sitar. Sitar I started when I moved to Delhi with him, and I started from scratch. So I became very close to Deepak Da. So me and Deepak Da, invariably we would share a room. But staying in Banaras or Delhi, I stayed for 7 years in his home, eating with him.
mm.
It was like living with your father, or
Oh, absolutely.
and taking care of everything. And he did that to all his students, whether they came from the West or they came from a village in India, or they were poor, or they were rich, or they were, he
He
never.
would even, I think he even would give them a stipend.
And to some of them he would even give a small stipend to make sure they have little money in their hand, to buy anything if they wanted, even though he was taking care of most of their needs. So that is something so
Mm.
unique, because he followed the Guru Shishya Parampara, the tradition in to the T, to the, to perfection, and which Baba did also. Baba Alauddin Khasab, he did the same in Maihar. So
Mm.
this is so unique and so rare and so wonderful. So when you said that, I thought we should take that up here and speak
Sure.
about it, because this is so
Yeah,
important.
absolutely. Yeah, after that, I would have a grant or something, so I would take care of my flight or the hotel, but he would always take me out. Like I would go to New York and he would stay at the Lexington Hotel. He had a suite up on, I think, the 22nd floor. So uh, I would go there and have a room, and he would take me for dinner and always cover the bill. And
Yeah.
it was, yeah, just amazing, fantastic. So yeah, after where were we?
We were
Oh,
in all.
so yeah, after India, I came back and finished. Actually didn't finish my dissertation. I kept writing. I had to do a lot of work on the dissertation materials, and my dissertation was actually on a Hindu devotional song in Benares on kirtan. So I'm sure there was a time after I came back uh, in 80, at the end of 81. And so again, I was in Illinois, uh, 82. And there must have been a summer where I went out and had some classes in New York again. Maybe he came to Chicago at that time. I can't remember exactly. But then I got the job here at UT in 1983. And I came here in August 1983 and started teaching in September. And he came in November of 1983 and stayed for a week because he had to do his concerto with the Austin Symphony Orchestra. And again, Sue Jones came with him. And at that time, Nora, or Geetali, she was still Geetali at that time, about 4 years old. And she came, and they stayed in a Best Western motel that was right a couple blocks away from the campus. So he was here for a week, and I was with him the whole time, carrying his sitar. And actually, he used my sitar for that concert. He used that Radha Krishna teak sitar that you
Which is
liked.
a wonderful sitar, which we hopefully we are going to hear it later today from you.
And yeah, so he used that sitar, and we had a class in Todi, Miyaki Todi, and Kamaj, maybe some Pt.Ravi. And yeah, so after that, it was here and there. Except in 1989, I think once before in '87. Actually, he came to UT in '87 and performed, and I drove to Houston to pick him up. So I was with him in the Houston concert. I can't remember the name of the South Indian family he stayed with, but I drove him and Kumar and Shubo here to Austin, and this was 1987, and he came to our first house. You know, when we were here in '83, we were in a tiny apartment, and Guruji came and had dinner in our little apartment here. And then after 2 years, we moved into a small house. So this was '87, and I took him out there to Wells Branch, and we had classes there. Actually, one of the pictures where he's teaching me and Shubo and Kumar is in the picture. That was from that Wells Branch house. So yeah, I guess he taught Abhogi and Hansakinkini and a couple other things at that time. And then we had the concert, and I played Tanpura. And I think I played Tanpura in Houston as well. And there may have been Dallas. I think I may have driven them to Dallas. I can't remember. So that way I would have classes, you know, wherever he had a concert that I could get to, he would give me a class as well. And then it was like that, except in 1989, I had a grant to travel with him, and I traveled the East Coast and the West Coast and Texas coast, 3 coasts. So that was for a month, and that was with Shubo and also Sukanya. He had just gotten married with Chinnama at that time. So she was new, and I guess it was her first trip to California. And that was that. So yeah, we had lots of classes together with Shubo. And then as you know, in 1991, I came for 6 months to Delhi.
Yes.
And
I'll come to that. I have just one question here, which I'm sure our viewers who are watching this, they will have. Now, these extensive sessions in Banaras, 10 days of, say, 10 hours of music, really barely time to go back to your hotel, sleep, and then get up, bathe, because he was very particular that you must bathe before you sit down to play. And he was very, very, so really very less time for anything else. How did you, and all the lessons with him was never less than a couple of hours, 4 hours, 3 hours. You know, it was never a half an hour lesson, a lot of thinking time. How did you process all that, Steve? And how did you retain in terms of keeping it in your mind, remembering it, writing, recording? How did you manage?
Recording. I recorded everything.
And what about notation? What about notations?
Oh, I have hundreds of pages of notation.
Yes. So you did that as well.
I can show you, like one notebook. I have 2 notebooks full.
How nice.
I constantly, and notating classes. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, I notate everything from the tapes, transcribe, and work that way.
Because every moment with him, every lesson, there's so much new stuff. So even though you were learning Yaman maybe for the 100th time,
oh yeah,
new things, new bandish, new sargam, new possibilities.
Yeah, new eyes.
To retain, keep all of that.
Yeah.
But I struggled because I would try to remember, then I would try to write down. Luckily, I could write notations, so I would do that. And then, of course, the big saving grace was the recordings that he allowed, for some time would allow. And then there was a period when he said, okay, no recordings.
Right, yeah.
It was always a mix of that,
Yeah, I can tell you, I've had instruction in planes, trains, and automobiles. And yeah, he taught Rag Surat on the airplane, and I notated as he taught me. I still have that original notation done in the plane, in the aircraft.
How nice, how nice.
So yeah, it was, words are too incapable of capturing the experience that we've had with him.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very emotional moment, Keith, Steve. Sorry, because it is so much. He's been so generous. He's been so large-hearted in sharing so much of his precious time. And I mean, he could have slept, he could have rested. He was so busy. Instead, he chose
Yeah.
to pick up his sitar, sit there, and give talim to all of us, teach us.
Right.
It is so, and the more time goes, the more you look back and more you think of those time. You really feel so grateful.
Mm,
Such a sense of gratitude.
absolutely. I actually have one question for you.
Sure, sure. I
You'll,
thought I was going to ask the questions.
you'll remember in 1992 when NHK from Japan came
Yeah,
for that long documentary.
beautiful documentary. Beautiful.
And he called us at, I think, 8 in the morning for that taping. And I showed up wearing a kurta and pajamas. And all of you guys were wearing blue jeans. And afterwards, he asked me, "What do I do?" And I was confused because we had no preparation. We got there, we sat down, there was nothing, no instruction as to what would take place other than Guruji will teach you for a few minutes. And so Guruji asked me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm a professor at the University of Texas," and blah 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 blah. And he said, "No, what do you do now?" I said, "What's going on?" And it was the first time I saw him so angry, and because we didn't get up to touch his feet. Remember? So
Yeah.
anyway, and so we had to do the whole thing over again. And then Aditya and you and Shubhendra and Uday, you were all dressed up in kurtas. So I want to know, whose idea was it to wear blue jeans?
Don't even. Who should we blame now?
Who to be blamed?
No, I think it just we were so caught up in that busy schedule, we didn't even have time to think about it. We got
Right.
up, we made sure we had a bath because that was so important, and we
Right.
just, I think, wore what came to our hands and just be there on time, because he, how much stickler for time he was.
Right. No,
So-
I kind of remember Shubhendra saying something about we were going to prove that you can play this music wearing any clothes or something like that. But it was very humorous.
Yeah, no. I think, as far as I can think or remember, we just didn't think about it. We just did
Right.
it.
No, I think he was just making a
And
comment.
through the recording, I think, while the recording was on, I think it realized at the same moment to all of us. There are sometimes thoughts which come in your brain and then come out and go to your head, and then, so I think that's what must have happened. So, and it occurred to all of us, including Guruji, while this is on, that, oh my God, these guys are all in jeans and t-shirts. And here we have an American guy who's in kurta pajama.
Yeah, later on, I was with him. We went to the market, and he was, expressing himself a bit. And he said, "You're more Indian than my Indian students."
Yes. So he was visibly very upset, and I think the next day or the day after, we redid that whole episode.
Right, and that's what's on the tape.
Yes, we dressed appropriately, and we did that. Because also, Steve, we were doing so much of running around. We were doing so much of running around, so we had to be in kurta pajama. It's not comfortable, and it's not practical. So.
And you remember we had such a traumatic time because our daughter had a ruptured ovarian cyst like 2 or 3 weeks after arriving, and had to have an operation. And then, next month, I guess I went to Mumbai with Guruji because he had the programs there. And while I was gone again, she had another problem and was back at that Sama hospital. Um, yeah, so it was busy, very hard to keep a household going and keep up with all of the talim.
It was
So,
difficult. It was tough, and it was one of those moments. Now thinking back, it was one of those tough moments. There were a lot of good moments, a lot of great moments, a lot of wonderful moments, but then there were a lot of tough moments. And this 92 period you're talking about was one of those tough moments when.
right. Yeah, and Guruji, people would attack him for various things.
Yeah,
It
it
was,
was a mixture of many things together, coming together. A lot of changes, lot of new things happening, lot of uncertainties, lot of insecurities. So there were many things, and I was at a threshold. I still remember it was going to be around 7 years since he accepted me as his disciple. It was only 5 years since I was playing the sitar. I was already in my late 20s, and so it was a mixture of many things. I can only talk for myself here, of course. Is that I was getting into a state where I wanted to start performing, I wanted to start earning, I wanted to slowly branch out. So it was a moment of lot of rethinking for me, and and really working it out, that how it's all going to fall in place in terms of doing what I want to do, which is music. So it was tough. So soon, I think 92, 93 was the period when I cleared the radio audition, the national auditions, and then I started performing in India and started going abroad and started a journey until 93. For 7 years, amongst all the disciples, I was staying the longest in Lodi Estate. And 93, then I moved out, and we already had taken up a place in Janakpuri, uh, where my brother and Shubhendra, they were staying. And but I could join them in the first part, even though I was paying a rent, and then the second, which was uh, the second house in Janakpuri. But 93, when I left for Germany, I left from Lodi Estate, 95 Lodi Estate, if you remember.
Mhm.
And then when I came back from my trip after 3 months in July, 4 months, I went end of March and came back in July. 4 months, I went to Janakpuri, and that's where then I stayed. So it was a time of change. I think it was nothing but a time of change for us, for Guruji, and but things slowly it moved into something wonderful for all of us, and we found our space, we found our balance, we heard our inner calling, and things
Yeah.
matured beautifully.
Yeah, after that 6 months in 1992, it was basically December 91 to June of 92. Uh, because I had the opportunity to practice so much, because you remember I had come to UT in 1983. It took me 2 years to finish my dissertation. I had to be publishing, teaching different courses. So I always had to balance, even though I taught sitar and tabla ever since I came here, but also in 1998, I brought the Javanese gamelan and then a musician from Java and was studying different instruments of the gamelan with him from 1999 on. So I had so many things going on, so I couldn't really practice like 3 or 4 hours a day other than that period in 1992. And so when I came back, I had really jumped up a level and was much better.
Yes, and you played that wonderful concert in Delhi with him at the.
Right. Yeah.
It was in the Taj Hotel, I think.
Yeah. I actually, before that, I had performed with him in 1991, I think. In October of 91, before we came to India in December. I played with him at UT, and that was a much better experience. I did the whole concert with him. We played Pt.Ravi, Malcolm's, Tilak Shyam. Actually, it started with Pt.Ravi, and then it got in Rupak Tal, then Tilak Shyam, Teen Tal, and Ek Tal, and then intermission, then Malcolm's, Alap Jor, and Jup Tal, and then finish with Manch Kamach. So that concert, because I have to get warmed up in order to play. And in Delhi, it was like he started at 105 miles per hour, and I was still at 75.
Correct.
So he sort of left me in the dust that time. But
that's wonderful. So there's so much of work you have done, so much of teaching, so much of. How do you see your contribution to this art form and to this great tradition?
Well, academically, I've written articles. I have other things. I have a ton of stuff that I could publish if I ever get time to write it out. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of students, introduced them to the sitar. I've taught academic courses on the music of India, but also in Austin, when I came here, there were very few people who had any interest in Indian classical music. And I managed to bring so many artists here to give concerts. And Guruji actually did a benefit concert to establish the Ravi Shankar Fund for Asian Performing Arts. So I used that fund to help underwrite so many concerts. Like I had Ustad Ali Akbar Khan 3 times. There was a Festival of India in 1986 that was nationwide, and I coordinated everything in Austin. The Dagar brothers, Zia Mohinuddin Dagar and Fariduddin Dagar came at that time. I had brought Ustad Ala Raka Khan. He actually stayed in our house for 3 days, and Zakir and Fazl Hussain and Sultan Khan were there. I brought Ishwarlal Mishra for a semester. I brought Sukhvinder Singh for a semester, and a second time for about 6 weeks. And I brought Swapan Chaudhary several times. He was the first. Actually, the first time I gave a concert here was with Shyam Kane, one of Zakir's students. And I also brought the Kathak dancer, Anjani Ambedkar, I think her name was. And as I said, I brought Shujat Khan, I brought Vishwa Mohan Bhatt, T. Vishwanathan, Sharon Lowen, the famous American Odissi dancer. So many musicians, over 30 concerts I arranged here.
How wonderful. How wonderful.
Yeah. Most recently, I brought Shubhendra and his wife Saskia for a Jugubandi with the tabla player. Aditya? Is it Aditya?
Kalyanpur.
Right. Yeah. Kalyanpur. Right. Aditya Kalyanpur. So, and then COVID hit. So.
Yes.
So I think I helped to expand. And then I also did the initial concert. It was just a house concert to establish the Indian Classical Music Circle of Austin. And that has now grown to be a very professional organization with a concert series every year.
Yes. I have performed for them, and they're very good, very good. And I'm happy. What a wonderful journey, Steve. It was very interesting. If it is possible, can we end today's show with your music? And I thank you very much for coming and speaking to us. And I look forward to seeing you soon. And
Right.
Beautiful.
Two
Thank you.
minutes over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It
Steve,
was
you take
fun.
care of yourself, and I hope to see you soon. And I'll invite you back to do the last closing speech. And thank you once again.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Having our show reflections, and it was very interesting to hear from you so much wonderful memories of Panditji. Thank
And
you so much.
yeah, that was just a small sampling. It's it was such an extraordinary experience
Yeah,
to have that privilege. I
Absolutely. Absolutely.
consider myself very fortunate.
the important part, the most important part you shared with us. And thank you, Gaurav.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
Steve.
Thank you.
And to the viewers, do join us on Thursday with our Musicurum Next Gen series online concert. And the young musicians, you can send your videos to us on our WhatsApp number so that we can shortlist and invite you people for your performance to our platform Musicurum Next Gen. To all the viewers, good night and stay safe.